It was just past 7 a.m. on a gloomy Monday in Southfield, Michigan, the kind of morning when the air feels heavier than it should, and the sky hangs low like it can't decide whether to rain or just sulk. Millie East Diner, squeezed between a locksmith shop and an old laundromat on Jefferson Street, was already coming to life. The clink of coffee cups, the sizzle of bacon on the grill, and the quiet shuffle of regulars sliding into booths they'd practically claimed as their own over the years. It wasn't much to look at stools torn here and there, blinds rattling whenever the wind blew, but people didn't come for the ambience. They came because it felt like home. Raymond Cole was already there, same as always. That booth by the window, back to the wall. His olive-green army jacket was buttoned tight despite the warmth inside, patched at the elbows, frayed at the collar, a coat that didn't shout, but whispered stories of a life lived in quiet resilience. He ordered the usual: hash browns, rye toast, black coffee with no sugar. No small talk, no fuss, just the steady rhythm of routine. Becca, the young waitress with a braided bun and permanent sharp stains on her hands, called him Mr. Cole, knowing better than to pry, but still noticing little things like how he wiped his hands before touching the sugar holder, even though he never used it, or how his eyes flicked to the door every time it opened. Millie, the owner, watched him too. She'd lost her husband years ago on deployment, and while Raymond never said much, she knew he'd served. There was a quiet respect between them, a shared understanding in the silence. Then came the officers. Trey Maddox and Kyle Crowley stepped into the diner like they owned the place, the bell above the door jangling a little too hard. Trey, tall and broad-shouldered with mirrored sunglasses still on, scanned the room immediately and locked onto Raymond. Raymond blinked once and nodded. "You buy something?" Trey pressed, stepping closer. "Breakfast's on the way," Raymond replied calmly. Crowley flipped open his notebook. "You have a receipt?" Before Raymond could answer, Becca jumped in. "I just took his order. He's a regular." Trey ignored her. "Did I ask you?" Millie stepped out from the kitchen, wiping her hands. "That man's been coming here every Monday for years." "Gosh, same as always." Trey finally looked at her. "We got a call," he said flatly. "Suspicious individual hanging around. Matches this gentleman's description." Millie raised an eyebrow. "Who called?" Trey didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to Raymond. "I'm gonna need to see some ID." Raymond didn't argue. He slowly reached into his coat pocket, pulled out an old leather wallet, and slid out a faded federal ID card. Crowley glanced at it and smirked. "Is this all you got?" Raymond nodded once. "That's all I need," Trey said, jaw tightening. "Step outside with us, sir. We just want to ask a few questions." "You can ask them here," Raymond replied evenly. "I'm not disturbing anyone." The diner shifted. The young couple at two booths looked down at their plates. The delivery driver shuffled awkwardly. Nobody spoke, but the energy was heavy. Trey leaned forward, voice dropping. "You homeless?" Raymond didn't hesitate. "I don't have a house, but I have a home right here in this town." Crowley laughed, scribbling in his notebook. "Real cute. How long you been sitting here?" "About 20 minutes," Raymond answered. "And how long you planning on staying?" "Long enough to eat my breakfast." Millie stepped closer. "He's not bothering anyone. If you've got something official, say it. If not, let him finish his meal." Trey's hand hovered near his belt, waiting for an excuse. Crowley kept writing. Becca gripped a coffee pot, knuckles white. The air felt thicker than before. Raymond didn't flinch or argue. He opened his coat, reached inside the pocket, and pulled out a beat-up flip phone, the kind you hardly see anymore. He flipped it open, pressed a button, and held it to his ear. "It's happening again," he said quietly, almost like talking to himself, then closed the phone and laid it gently next to his untouched coffee. Everything paused, the spatula on the grill, Crowley's pen tapping, even the couple mid-bite. Trey squinted. "Who'd you just call?" Raymond didn't answer, just looked back calmly. "Sir, I asked you a question," Trey said louder. Raymond stayed silent, deliberate like he'd been through this before and knew exactly how it ended. Millie's eyes darted between the phone and Raymond's face, then back to the officers. She'd seen her share of trouble, but this was different. Becca's grip on the pot tightened, her chest constricted watching Raymond stay so composed in rising tension. Trey looked at Crowley, then back at Raymond. If that was supposed to scare us, it didn't. Raymond finally spoke. It wasn't meant to. The quiet sharpened like everyone was holding their breath without knowing why. Trey stepped forward, hand on cuffs, voice flat. That's it. Stand up, sir. You're coming outside with us. Raymond didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there, anchored to his booth in the air. On what charge? He asked, voice low. We just want to talk, Trey said, fingers curling around metal cuffs. Then talk, Raymond said. I'm not leaving my breakfast. Millie quickly intervened. He hasn't done anything. You got no reason. I suggest you step back unless you want to be charged with obstruction, Trey snapped. The diner fell completely silent. A fork clinked loudly somewhere. Becca stepped forward, knees weak, eyes locked on Raymond's calm. Crowley hovered, uneasy. He didn't like where this was headed, but didn't stop it. Trey leaned in, cuffs halfway out. That's enough. A chair scraped. An older man in a camouflage jacket stood up from across the room. He's not alone. Trey looked confused. Then a woman in her 60s stood beside him, teacher's ID clipped to her sweater. I've known that man since I moved here. He's no threat. Two more people rose quietly, but firmly. A delivery guy crossed his arms. A young mother with a stroller spoke clearly. If this is how you treat someone just trying to eat, what does that say about you? No shouting. No chaos. Just a silent, unified stand. Coffee cups clenched like shields. Trey looked around, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes, the phones quietly filming. He hesitated. Raymond stood up calm, steady, and somehow bigger than anyone remembered. Not by size, but by presence. He looked Trey in the eye. You're making a scene, he said softly. Trey opened his mouth, but the weight of the room pressed down before he could speak. Crowley muttered, maybe we take a step back, but it was too late. The diner had chosen, and it wasn't the badge. Then the bell above the door slammed hard as it swung open. No one turned immediately. All eyes were fixed on Raymond, and the two officers locked in a frozen standoff. A voice cut through the tension like a snapping wire. Officers Maddox and Crowley, do not move. It wasn't loud, but carried weight sharp, commanding, practiced. Heads turned to see a man in a navy blue overcoat, mid-40s, crisp white shirt, polished shoes, leather badge case in hand. Michael Sterling, Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Trey blinked. This isn't your jurisdiction. Sterling didn't slow his stride. Actually, it became my jurisdiction the second you violated this man's civil liberties on a public frequency. He stopped next to Raymond's booth, nodding at him. Sir, Raymond gave a small nod back, but didn't speak. We monitor specific language on open radio lines, Sterling continued, turning to the officers. When I heard the phrase uncooperative, suspicious male, no fixed address, I got in my car. He scanned the room. Is there anyone here who can confirm Mr. Cole's behavior was disruptive? No one answered. Millie stepped forward. He was sitting right here, quiet, waiting for his breakfast. Becca nodded. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't do anything wrong. The man in the camo jacket spoke up. They were the ones causing trouble. Sterling looked back at Trey. Your body camera's on, correct? Trey stiffened. Of course. Good, Sterling said. Because what I walked into wasn't just abuse of authority, it's liability. Crowley shifted uncomfortably. With all due respect, sir, we were responding to a complaint filed by... No name. No contact, Sterling interrupted. You got nothing, and you pushed it anyway. Trey's face flushed, breathing quickened. I'm going to need both your badge numbers, Sterling said, calm but firm. Trey slowly reached into his vest, pulling out his ID. Crowley followed. Sterling just noted the numbers, looking back at Raymond. You all right? Raymond nodded once. Didn't want to call you, but you were right too. Sterling then apologized to the diner. This will be handled. The officers turned and walked out. The tension released, replaced by quiet relief. Becca let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and leaned against the counter, knees weak. Millie poured Raymond fresh coffee. He nodded and wrapped his hands around the mug. Sterling stayed standing nearby, expression unreadable. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, exhaled, and muttered, "Well, that didn't take long." He showed Raymond the screen. The video was already on social media. Less than 20 minutes after the officers had entered, someone had recorded the whole thing, from Trey raising his voice to Sterling demanding badge numbers. Views were climbing, comments pouring in. "That's us," Becca whispered. "That's this morning." Sterling nodded. The internet moves fast when it smells injustice. Millie shook her head. "I didn't even see who filmed it." "Doesn't matter," Sterling said. "It's out there, and people are paying attention." Raymond didn't look at the screen. He just stared out the window, like the world outside was moving too fast. "I didn't ask to be a headline," he said quietly. "You didn't have to," Sterling replied. "They made you one the second they walked in." Raymond sipped his coffee, still hot, still bitter, just how he liked it. The diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the story was no longer just within those walls. Word began to spread about Raymond Cole, not from him. He didn't post or tweet. It started with a blurry black and white photo from more than 20 years ago, showing a younger Raymond in a press suit, standing behind a podium with a Department of Justice seal. Colleagues and attorneys spoke of long hours, high-stakes cases, and his unwavering sense of right and wrong. One judge said it was Raymond who gave her first break. A civil rights lawyer said she watched him dismantle corrupt precincts quietly, without seeking the spotlight. Honors and commendations filled his past, but Raymond had always turned down most ceremonies. He cared about the people who never got to speak. Donations flowed into veterans' housing programs inspired by his story. Neighbors now greeted him by name. Kids who once looked through him left handwritten notes. "Thank you for sitting still when others didn't." The booth by the window remained his, coffee strong, toast a little too dry, but something deeper had shifted. One rainy morning, a young man stepped into Millie's, soaked and unsure where to sit. Seeing Raymond in his usual spot, he hesitated, then asked, "Mind if I sit?" Raymond nodded and slid the cup across the table. No words were needed. Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the most strength standing steady when the world tries to shake you. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that show the power of dignity and quiet resistance. Share your thoughts below. What does justice really look like? And when silence becomes the loudest voice, who is really being heard?